The next morning, the city woke to sunshine for the first time in weeks. The rain had washed everything clean, and the air felt fresh, like a new beginning waiting quietly on the horizon. But for Lily, the light brought more confusion than peace. She couldn't stop thinking about Ethan's words from the night before. Maybe I don't belong in my world anymore. They played in her mind over and over as she walked to the cafe, her heart unsure of what it wanted, and her mind warning her to stay careful. When she arrived, the cafe was unusually quiet. The regular customers hadn't come in yet. She started her shift like any other day, cleaning tables and arranging cups, trying to keep busy. But then the door opened, and Ethan stepped inside, dressed simply this time, no expensive suit, no driver waiting outside. Just jeans, a plain shirt, and a look that carried both nervousness and hope. "Morning," he said softly. Lily froze for a moment, surprised by how different he looked. Less like a billionaire, more like a man just trying to belong somewhere. "You're early," she said. "I couldn't wait," he replied. "I wanted to talk to you before the day got noisy." She looked at him cautiously. "About what?" Ethan took a deep breath. "About yesterday. About us." Lily's eyes widened slightly. "There is no us, Ethan. You and I, we come from two different worlds. You live in skyscrapers, I live paycheck to paycheck. We don't even speak the same language when it comes to life." He smiled gently. "Then maybe it's time I learned yours." She shook her head. "You don't understand. Love, it's not easy. It's not about gestures or money. It's about sacrifice. About standing by someone when everything else is falling apart. And you—" She paused, her voice trembling. "You've never had to live that way." Ethan nodded slowly. "You're right. I've never had to fight for anything. But that's exactly why I'm here. Because for the first time in my life, I found something worth fighting for." Lily's heart skipped a beat. His voice was calm, sincere, but filled with emotion. She wanted to look away, but his eyes held her still, not with power, but with truth. "Ethan, I can't be your lesson in humility," she whispered. "I don't want to be someone you use to fix your emptiness." He shook his head. "You're not. You're the only one who ever saw me. Not the billionaire, not the man with power, but the man who's still figuring out who he is." Silence filled the cafe. The smell of coffee hung between them, warm and familiar. Outside, the morning light streamed through the window, falling softly on her face. For the first time, she didn't look away. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a message from the hospital. Her mother was ready to go home. Relief flooded her heart and tears filled her eyes. "She's going home," she said, her voice breaking. Ethan smiled, his eyes soft. "That's the best news I've heard all week." Lily looked at him, her emotions tangled between gratitude and fear. "You didn't do this, right? You didn't pay for it?" Ethan shook his head. "No, I wanted to. But the doctor said the bills were already cleared. By an anonymous donor." She frowned, confused. "Then who—" He smiled faintly. "Maybe someone else who saw how strong you are." Lily didn't know whether to believe him, but something inside her told her he was telling the truth. She stepped closer, her eyes shining with emotion. "You're a strange man, Ethan Cole." "I've been called worse," he said with a grin. For the first time, she laughed freely, a warm, honest laugh that made him smile too. Then quietly, she said, "I don't know what this is between us, but I do know you've changed." He nodded. "You changed me, Lily. You made me see what matters." The door opened suddenly, and the first customers of the day walked in. Lily moved back behind the counter, slipping into her role again. Ethan stood there for a moment, unsure if he should leave. Then Lily looked at him and said softly, "Come back tomorrow." He blinked. "Tomorrow?" "Yes," she said with a shy smile. "Maybe I'll teach you how to make real coffee." Ethan's face broke into a grin. "I'll be here." He turned to leave, and as he stepped outside, the sunlight fell on him, warm and golden. For the first time in years, he felt light. Not because of his money or success, but because of her. Because of the woman who spoke from the heart and reminded him what it meant to be human. That night, Lily visited her mother at home. As they sat together, Her mother said quietly, "That man, he cares for you, doesn't he?" Lily blushed and looked away. "He's different." Her mother smiled faintly. "Maybe love finds us when we stop looking for it." Meanwhile, Ethan stood on his balcony, staring at the city lights. The world still moved fast, deals, meetings, and deadlines, but he wasn't chasing it anymore. His heart was somewhere else now, in a small cafe where love had quietly brewed between two people from different worlds. And as the city slept, both of them, the billionaire and the waitress, found themselves thinking of each other. Not with fear, not with confusion, but with a feeling that neither could deny anymore. Because sometimes love doesn't need to make sense. It just needs two hearts willing to listen, and one moment when pride finally gives way to truth. The next few days passed quietly. Ethan didn't go to the cafe, but not because he didn't want to. He stayed away because he didn't know what to say. That night at the hospital had changed something between them, but he wasn't sure what it was. He found himself staring at his office window, watching the city below, but none of it looked the same anymore. The people rushing, the cars honking, the flashing lights. It all felt meaningless compared to the small cafe, the quiet girl with the tired smile and the strength she carried in her fragile hands. Lily, on the other hand, thought she would never see him again. She assumed that a man like him, a billionaire with endless choices, would eventually forget her, a waitress from a small cafe with a sick mother and nothing more to offer. But every time she brewed a cup of coffee, she remembered his calm eyes in the rain, the way he said, "Maybe someone can." That sentence stayed in her mind like an echo she couldn't silence. On the fourth day, the doorbell above the cafe rang, and there he was, standing with a hesitant smile, holding 2 paper cups of coffee from another shop. "I thought I'd return the favor," he said lightly. Lily looked at him, surprised, then smiled. "You bought coffee from someone else?" "It's not as good as yours," he admitted. "I learned that the hard way." She laughed softly, and for a moment, the tension between them melted away. They sat at his usual table. The conversation was easy, lighter than before, but still layered with things unspoken. After a while, Ethan asked, "How's your mom?" Lily's smile faded a little, but she nodded. "Better now. The doctor says she'll recover slowly." "That's good," he said. "If you ever need anything," she cut him off gently. "You've already done enough." Ethan wanted to say he hadn't done anything at all. But before he could speak, the cafe door opened and a tall man in a suit walked in. He glanced around until his eyes landed on Ethan. "Sir, the investors are waiting," he said sharply. Ethan sighed. "Give me 10 minutes." The man nodded but didn't hide his disapproval. When he left, Lily raised an eyebrow. "Investors? You really are a busy man." "Busy doesn't mean happy," he said quietly. There was a long silence before Lily spoke again. "Why me, Mr. Cole?" she asked softly. "You could talk to anyone. You could go anywhere. Why come here?" Ethan looked at her, searching for the right words. "Because you don't treat me like I'm worth billions," he said finally. "You talk to me like I'm just a person." "I didn't know how much I needed that." Lily's eyes softened, but she looked away. "Sometimes it's easier to see the truth when you don't have money to blur it," she said. He smiled sadly. "Maybe I've been blind for too long." Just then, thunder rolled again outside. The cafe lights flickered and Lily groaned. "The storm again," she said. Ethan chuckled. "Seems like storms follow us." "Or maybe we keep walking into them," she replied. The power went out completely, leaving them in the dim glow of candles. For a few moments, neither spoke. The sound of rain filled the silence. Then, Ethan said softly, "You once told me peace can't be bought." "I think I'm beginning to understand that." Lily smiled faintly. "Peace isn't about what you have. It's about what you let go." He looked at her carefully. "What if I'm not ready to let go?" "Then maybe you're not ready to find peace," she whispered. Her voice trembled slightly, but her eyes stayed strong. Ethan leaned back, studying her face in the flickering light. There was something about her, a calmness that hid deep pain, a quiet courage that made his chest ache. "You're different, Lily," he said. You see the world in a way I can't. You could, she said softly, if you stop looking down at it. Her words made him smile, but they also struck deep. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not his board members, not his friends, not even his family. Everyone treated him like a symbol of success, but she saw him as something else, something human. Suddenly, the sound of rain grew heavier. Lily got up to close the window, but the wind pushed it open wider, splashing them both. She laughed, hair falling into her face, and Ethan stood beside her, helping her pull it shut. Their hands touched for a second, and the world seemed to freeze. The laughter faded, replaced by silence, soft, fragile, and electric. Lily stepped back, her heart racing. Ethan's eyes met hers, and in that moment, neither of them said a word. The storm outside was wild, but inside it felt even stronger. Finally, Lily spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. You should go before the roads flood. Ethan hesitated. Do you want me to? She looked away. It doesn't matter what I want. He took a step closer. It does to me. She swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. You don't belong in my world, Ethan. Maybe that's the problem, he said quietly. Maybe I don't belong in mine anymore. The words hung in the air, raw and real. For the first time, she didn't know what to say. Before she could respond, lightning flashed outside, illuminating his face. Not the confident billionaire everyone knew, but a man searching for something real. Ethan turned toward the door. I'll see you tomorrow, he said softly, and as he left, Lily stood by the window, watching his car disappear into the rain. Her heart was caught between fear and something she didn't want to name, something that felt too much like love. The next evening came with heavy clouds and the promise of rain. The cafe was quieter than usual. The smell of coffee mixed with the sound of soft jazz playing from the small radio behind the counter. Ethan sat at his usual table, but tonight his thoughts were far away. He had spent the entire day in meetings, surrounded by people who spoke only of profits and percentages. But his mind kept drifting back to a small hospital room, to Lily's mother's weak smile, and to Lily's tired eyes that still managed to shine with hope. When Lily entered the cafe, she looked different, a little pale, a little slower than usual. But when she saw Ethan, she still smiled. You came early today, she said, placing a cup of coffee in front of him. Maybe I wanted peace before the storm, he replied, glancing toward the window where dark clouds gathered. She chuckled softly. Peace is rare these days. Then maybe you can teach me how to find it, he said. Lily looked at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. You can't buy peace, Mr. Cole. You have to live in a way that earns it. Her words were gentle, but they struck deep. Ethan leaned back, watching her move from table to table, graceful yet tired. He could tell something was wrong. Her smile was still there, but it wasn't reaching her eyes. When she passed by his table again, he said softly, You don't look well. Maybe you should rest. Lily stopped for a second and smiled. Rest is for people who can afford it, she said lightly, then continued her work. A few hours later, when the rain finally started to pour, the cafe began to empty. Ethan stayed, pretending to read, but really waiting. When Lily stepped outside after closing, she stood under the small awning, staring at the rain. Ethan followed her, holding an umbrella. Let me give you a ride, he said. She shook her head. It's just a few blocks. I'll be fine. It's raining hard, he insisted. Please. She hesitated, then finally nodded. They walked together, sharing the umbrella, their footsteps echoing on the wet pavement. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air smelled of rain and earth, and the only sound was water falling around them. Then Lily broke the silence. Why do you keep coming here, Mr. Cole? A man like you doesn't need coffee from a place like this. Ethan looked at her and smiled faintly. Maybe I don't come for the coffee. She turned to him, surprised, but before she could say anything, thunder rumbled in the sky. You're a strange man, she said softly. And you're a brave woman, he replied. When they reached a small old hospital building, Lily stopped. This is where my mom's staying, she said quietly. Ethan looked up at the flickering light above the entrance and nodded. I know, she frowned. You know? He realized he had said too much but didn't take it back. I've been there, he admitted. I saw you once taking care of her. You didn't see me. Lily looked down, her lips trembling slightly. Why would you do that? Because I wanted to understand, he said softly. I wanted to see the world that made you who you are. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned toward the rain, her voice quiet. You don't have to understand me, sir. My world is small, but it's mine. I don't have money, but I have meaning. You have everything. Why come searching here? Ethan took a deep breath. Because everything I have feels empty. For a moment, she didn't look at him. The rain poured harder, washing away the sound of traffic. You can't fix emptiness with sympathy, she said. Her voice was shaking, but her words were firm. I don't need help, Mr. Cole. I just need to stand on my own. Ethan's voice softened. I'm not here to fix you. Maybe I just need to learn from you. Lily turned to him then, her eyes bright with unshed tears. You can't learn struggle by watching it, she said. You can only live it. Ethan wanted to argue, but he couldn't. She was right. He had lived in luxury for so long that he had forgotten what it meant to truly fight for something. But as he looked at her, the tired face, the trembling hands, the strength in her voice, he realized that she was the bravest person he had ever met. Before he could speak again, Lily's phone rang. She answered quickly, her face going pale. What happened? She whispered. Then she ran inside the hospital, forgetting the umbrella, leaving Ethan standing in the rain. Without thinking, he followed her. Inside, the nurse told Lily that her mother's condition had worsened. Lily's hands covered her face, tears falling freely now. Ethan stood behind her, helpless. For the first time in his life, money couldn't solve the problem in front of him. After a few hours, the doctors managed to stabilize her mother. Lily came out, soaked in tears and rain, and sat on a bench outside. Ethan quietly sat beside her. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, she whispered, Money can't save everything. He looked at her and said softly, Maybe not, but maybe someone can. She turned to him, eyes red but calm. You don't have to stay. I want to, he said. The rain had stopped now. The streetlights glowed softly through the mist. For a long while, they just sat there in silence. When she finally looked at him again, there was something different in her eyes, a kind of quiet trust. Thank you, she said. For what? He asked. For being here, she replied. Ethan smiled gently. Sometimes being there is all we can do, he said. She nodded. Sometimes it's enough. That night, as she went back inside and he sat alone in the car, Ethan realized that something inside him had shifted. He no longer wanted to save her or impress her. He just wanted to be someone worthy of her respect. And for the first time in years, the billionaire who thought he had everything finally understood what it meant to feel human. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the cafe earlier than usual. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, but the place felt emptier without Lily's presence. He sat at his usual corner table, pretending to read a newspaper, though his eyes never moved across the page. After half an hour, the doorbell jingled, and there she was. Lily, walking in quietly, her hair slightly messy, her eyes tired but still shining with that same soft light. When she saw Ethan, she smiled like nothing had changed. Good morning, sir. The usual? She asked. Ethan nodded, but noticed her hands were trembling slightly as she held the notepad. When she placed the cup before him, he spoke gently. You weren't here for a few days. Lily tried to hide her surprise. Yes, my mom wasn't feeling well, she said quickly. She's better now. But Ethan could hear the lie in her voice. There was something forced in her tone, something she didn't want to share. He wanted to ask more, but he didn't want to make her uncomfortable. So instead, he just said, I hope she gets better soon. Lily smiled gratefully, but her eyes looked away. As the day went on, Ethan stayed longer, pretending to work on his laptop, though his mind kept returning to her. He noticed how she hid her tiredness behind laughter. how she helped everyone without complaining, and how she smiled even when her hands shook from exhaustion. It wasn't a fake smile. It was the kind that told a story of struggle and hope. He couldn't understand how someone with so little could look so peaceful. That evening, when the cafe closed, Ethan stayed behind, saying he had a call to finish. Through the glass, he watched Lily counting the day's earnings, then giving half of her tips to the old cleaner before walking out into the cold. The way she walked, fast but graceful, told him she was used to rushing, used to carrying heavy days on light shoulders. Something about it made his heart ache. Later that night, Ethan made a call to one of his contacts in the hospital management. He asked if a woman named Maria Hayes, Lily's mother, was admitted there. When the voice on the other end confirmed, Ethan fell silent. He didn't know why, but hearing it made him feel helpless. The next day, without telling anyone, he went to the hospital himself. He walked down the quiet hallways, his expensive shoes echoing on the floor. When he reached the room, he saw Lily sitting beside her mother's bed, feeding her soup gently. Her hair was tied back and her uniform looked worn out. Her mother, weak but smiling, touched Lily's hand and whispered, "You work too hard, sweetheart." Lily smiled and said, "I have to. Mom, the bills won't pay themselves." Ethan stood at the door, unseen, listening to the soft conversation between them. The billionaire who had once thought money could fix everything suddenly felt powerless. He left quietly, not wanting her to know he had been there. That night, sitting in his penthouse, he couldn't stop thinking about what he'd seen. He poured himself a drink and looked out at the skyline. The city was beautiful from up high, but also lonely. "She's stronger than anyone I know," he murmured. For the first time, he didn't feel proud of his wealth. He felt small before her courage. The next morning, Ethan returned to the cafe again. When Lily saw him, she greeted him with her usual soft tone. "You never miss a day," she said playfully. "Maybe I like the coffee," he replied, smiling. She laughed, but there was a flicker of sadness in her eyes that didn't escape him. After a pause, he said, "You work too hard." She looked surprised. "Hard work keeps me alive, sir." "It shouldn't have to," he said. "Everyone deserves rest." She smiled faintly. "Maybe in another life." When Ethan finished his drink, he quietly left an envelope under the cup, a large sum of money. But a few minutes later, Lily came running outside holding the envelope. "Sir, you left this behind," she said. He turned and said calmly, "It's for you." She shook her head. "No, I can't take this." "Why not?" he asked. "You need it." Lily looked up at him, her eyes steady. "Because peace doesn't come from what people give you. It comes from what you earn yourself." For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. Her words cut deep, simple yet powerful. He wanted to tell her he had seen her at the hospital, that he knew about her struggles, but something stopped him. He realized that pity was the last thing she wanted. She didn't need saving. She just needed to be seen. That night, as Ethan lay awake, her words echoed again and again. Peace doesn't come from what people give you. He realized she wasn't poor at all. She had a kind of wealth he had never known, contentment. And for the first time in his life, Ethan wanted that more than money. The next morning, he called his financial advisor and made an anonymous donation to the same hospital where Lily's mother was being treated. He didn't want her to know it was from him. All he wanted was to ease her burden quietly. When he returned to the cafe later, Lily looked happier. "My mom's treatment is going well," she said with a bright smile. "Someone paid part of the hospital bill. I don't know who, but it feels like a miracle." Ethan smiled softly, hiding the truth. "Maybe good things happen to good people," he said. Lily laughed lightly, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "If that's true, then maybe life isn't as unfair as I thought." Ethan nodded. "Maybe not." Their eyes met for a moment, his filled with admiration, hers with warmth. The silence between them said everything that words couldn't. That was the night Ethan realized something he couldn't deny anymore. He wasn't just drawn to her kindness. He was falling for her, Not the way he admired success or beauty, but in a way that felt deeper, quieter, and truer. The billionaire had finally found something that no amount of money could buy: the meaning behind a waitress's smile. The next few days passed quietly, but something had changed in Ethan. Each morning he woke up earlier, dressed in his best suit, and told his driver to stop by the same small cafe. His assistant noticed his schedule was different now, but he said nothing. For the first time in years, Ethan ignored the stock market opening bell. Instead, he listened to the sound of the cafe doorbell as it jingled when he walked in. Each time, Lily would look up from behind the counter, surprise flashing in her eyes for a second before she smiled politely and greeted him. "Good morning, sir." "The usual," she'd ask, and he'd nod, pretending it was just another cup of coffee. But they both knew it wasn't just that anymore. He started watching her when she wasn't looking, how she smiled at old customers, how she wrote little encouraging notes on napkins for children, how she rushed to refill someone's cup before they even asked. There was a warmth in her that made the world feel slower, softer. Ethan didn't understand it, but he liked it. The more he saw her, the more he felt something strange. Envy, perhaps. She had nothing, yet she looked happier than he'd ever been. One afternoon, while Lily was cleaning a table, a group of wealthy young men walked in. They wore expensive watches and loud laughter. Ethan recognized one of them, his client's son. They ordered loudly, made jokes about the cafe being too simple, and when Lily brought their coffee, one of them smirked. "Hey, sweetheart, if you ever want to make real money, come work at my father's club," he said. The others laughed. Lily froze, embarrassed, but tried to stay calm. "Thank you, sir, but I'm fine here," she said politely. The man laughed louder. Sure. I'm sure this billionaire over there will promote you soon," he said, nodding toward Ethan, who had been quietly watching. Ethan's expression changed instantly. He stood up, his chair scraping the floor sharply. The group went silent. "Apologize," Ethan said in a calm but deadly voice. The young man looked confused. "What?" Ethan took a step closer. "You heard me. Apologize to her." The arrogance in his tone was gone, replaced by quiet power. The young man stammered. "I was just joking, sir." "Then joke with someone your own size." Ethan cut him off. The entire cafe was silent now. Lily's hands trembled slightly, but she tried to step in. "It's okay, sir, please." Ethan turned to her, his eyes softening. "No, it's not." The young men quickly muttered an apology before rushing out. Ethan sat back down, the tension fading slowly. Lily brought his coffee again, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes, I did," Ethan replied quietly. "Some lessons are worth teaching." For the first time, Lily smiled at him differently, not out of politeness, but gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. Ethan looked at her for a moment and then smiled back. "You're welcome." From that day, something changed between them. Their talks grew longer, their silences softer. Ethan would sometimes help her carry trays or fix broken chairs when the cafe was busy. The staff started whispering that something was going on, but neither of them said a word. It wasn't love yet. It was something more fragile, something growing quietly, like sunlight touching cold glass. One evening, as the cafe was about to close, Ethan noticed Lily standing outside looking at the sky. "Waiting for someone?" he asked as he walked up beside her. She shook her head. "No, just thinking," she said. "About what?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "About how people who seem to have everything often look lonelier than those who have nothing." Ethan chuckled softly. "Are you calling me lonely?" "No," she said, glancing at him. "But maybe you're searching for something that money can't buy." Her words hit deeper than she knew. Ethan wanted to ask her how she understood him so well, but before he could, her phone rang. Her face changed when she saw the number. "I have to go," she said quickly, grabbing her bag. "Is everything okay?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, just my mom." She hurried away before he could say anything else. Ethan stood there watching her disappear into the crowd. Something inside him told him it wasn't fine at all. The next day, Lily didn't come to work, nor the day after. Ethan asked the cafe owner, who said she had called in sick. He wanted to ask more but stopped himself. He didn't want to look like he cared too much. Still, his mind refused to rest. On the third day, he sent his assistant to quietly check on her. What he discovered left Ethan speechless. Lily was living in a small apartment near the hospital, working double shifts to pay for her mother's treatment. Her father had passed away a few years ago, and she had dropped out of college to support her family. Ethan sat in his car outside her building, watching the dim lights from her window. He felt something heavy in his chest. Guilt, maybe, or admiration. This girl, who had every reason to give up, still carried herself with pride and grace. She didn't complain, didn't beg, didn't pretend. She just lived with quiet strength. He thought about all the people he had met, business partners, investors, so-called friends, and realized none of them had ever impressed him like she had. That night, as he stared at the city lights from his penthouse, Ethan whispered to himself, "Maybe she's the real billionaire." He didn't know why he said it, but it felt true. Lily had something he didn't, peace. And for the first time in his life, Ethan wanted something that couldn't be bought, only earned. He didn't know it yet, but their two worlds were about to crash together in ways neither of them could imagine. The next morning, the city woke up with its usual rush, cars honking, people hurrying, and the sound of busy footsteps echoing on wet pavements. Inside the Morning Cup Cafe, Lily was already setting the tables. She looked calm, but a small thought from last night kept returning. The strange man with sharp eyes and an unreadable smile. She had met rude customers before, but Ethan Cole was different. His challenge had felt more personal, like he wanted to test her heart rather than her mind. Still, she pushed the thought away and went back to work. Around noon, the cafe bell rang again, and when she turned, she saw him. Ethan walked in, dressed in a gray suit this time, looking every bit the powerful businessman. But unlike yesterday, he wasn't checking his phone or frowning. He was looking straight at her. Lily felt a tiny pinch of nervousness but greeted him politely. "Good afternoon, sir. The same coffee?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Ethan smiled slightly. "Yes, and maybe—" "A few answers," she blinked. "Answers?" He leaned forward on the counter. "Yesterday you said I should invest in people. I've been thinking about that." Lily gave a small laugh. "It was just a thought, sir. I didn't mean to confuse you." Ethan shook his head. "No, you didn't confuse me. You made me curious." She poured his coffee and brought it to his table, still unsure where this conversation would go. He sat quietly, studying her as she moved between tables. Something about her presence calmed the noise in his head. When she finally returned, he asked, "Do you really believe kindness is better than money?" She looked at him, then at the window where raindrops started sliding down the glass. "I think kindness lasts longer," she said softly. "Money can buy comfort, but not peace. It doesn't hug you when life breaks you." Her words were simple, but they hit him deeper than any boardroom speech. Ethan had met thousands of people who wanted his wealth, his name, his power, but none who spoke about peace. He stirred his coffee slowly. "You talk like someone who's lost something," he said quietly. Lily smiled faintly. "Maybe I have. Maybe that's how people learn." Her eyes carried sadness, but she quickly changed the topic. "You must have everything, right? A man like you doesn't come to a small cafe without reason." Ethan looked down. "Maybe I came to remember something I lost, too," he said under his breath, almost as if he was talking to himself. As the day went on, Ethan stayed longer than before. He asked more questions, not about stocks or companies, but about life. "Why do you work so hard for so little?" he asked once. Lily wiped the counter and said, "Because some things are worth doing even when they don't pay well." "Like what?" he pressed. She smiled. "Like taking care of people you love." Ethan didn't ask more, but those words hit him again. He couldn't remember the last time he had done something for love and not for gain. When his phone rang, Ethan glanced at the screen. It was his business partner calling, but he ignored it. He didn't want to leave yet. Something about this quiet girl made him forget about his meetings, his deadlines, and his pride. Before leaving, he said, "You should come work for me. I could pay you 10 times more." Lily looked surprised, but then shook her head politely. "Thank you, sir, but I'm fine here." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You'd turn down a billionaire's offer?" She nodded. "Yes, because I'm not for sale." Her calm refusal left him speechless. He laughed softly, not out of mockery but out of disbelief. He had never been told no so simply, so gently. As he stood to leave, Lily called out, "Sir." He turned. "Maybe you'll understand one day," she said. "People are not just numbers or profits. Sometimes they're the real reason you succeed." Ethan didn't respond. He just watched her for a moment before walking out into the rain. Outside, he stood under the cafe sign, staring at the name. Morning Cup Cafe. It suddenly felt like a strange metaphor. Every morning, people came here for warmth, not just coffee. Maybe that was what he was missing. Warmth. The world he lived in was cold, mechanical, full of deals that had no soul. Inside that small cafe, he had found something simple yet powerful. Honesty. As he got into his car, his driver asked, "Same time tomorrow, sir?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked at his reflection in the window, the reflection of a man who had everything but didn't feel alive. "Yes," he said finally. "Same time." The driver nodded and drove away. That night, in his penthouse overlooking the glowing skyline, Ethan found himself restless. He tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept wandering back to her. Her words played again and again, "Invest in people, not papers." He poured himself a drink and stood by the window. For years, he had thought success was about numbers and control. But that one sentence from a waitress had made him question his entire life. Who was she really? How did she speak with such calm wisdom? The rain outside softened into silence. Ethan picked up his phone and looked at the calendar filled with meetings. For the first time, he deleted one. He wanted to go back, not for coffee, not for business, but for something he couldn't explain. A strange feeling had started inside him, small but real. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was connection. He didn't know her story, but he wanted to. He didn't know why she mattered, but she did. Somewhere across the city, Lily sat beside her small window, sipping tea. Her mother's medicine lay on the table beside her, and the bills she had to pay were still unopened. She thought about the man in the suit, the one who asked strange questions. She smiled faintly and whispered, "He'll never understand." But deep down, she hoped she was wrong. Neither of them knew that their worlds had already begun to change. A billionaire chasing meaning and a waitress teaching him what it really meant to be rich. The golden glow of the city lights reflected on the large glass windows of the Morning Cup Cafe, a quiet place that smelled of roasted beans and soft music. It was one of those evenings when the sky looked tired, and people came in just to escape their own thoughts. The doorbell jingled as a tall man in a dark suit entered. His name was Ethan Cole, a billionaire whose face was known in newspapers, business magazines, and on television. He was the kind of man who looked like he had everything, but still searched for something he couldn't name. The cafe suddenly grew quiet when he walked in. The barista froze for a second, the old couple in the corner whispered, and even the clock seemed to tick slower. Ethan didn't look around. He just sat at the corner table, pulled out his phone, and started scrolling through numbers and charts that looked meaningless to anyone else. His eyes were sharp, cold, and tired. He was the kind of man who had learned to trust data more than people. A few minutes later, a young waitress named Lily approached his table. She was wearing a plain apron and had strands of brown hair falling on her forehead. Her smile was small but real, the kind of smile that warmed the room quietly. "Good evening, sir," she said gently. "Would you like to see the menu?" Ethan didn't look up. "Just coffee." "Black," he replied without emotion. Lily nodded and walked away, but something about his tone made her glance back once more. There was something sad about him, not the kind of sadness that came from loss, but from loneliness. When she returned with his coffee, He was still staring at his phone. "Anything else?" she asked softly. Ethan looked up this time, his eyes studying her face for a moment. "Tell me something," he said suddenly. "If you had $1 million, what would you invest in?" Lily blinked, a little surprised. "Excuse me?" she said, unsure if he was joking. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "You work in a cafe, you must meet all kinds of people. Tell me, what stock should I buy next?" His voice was calm but filled with challenge. The other customers glanced at them, pretending not to listen but clearly curious. It wasn't every day that a billionaire asked a waitress for stock advice. Lily's cheeks flushed. She didn't know much about business, but she could feel the arrogance in his tone. Yet she didn't want to sound afraid. She took a deep breath and said, "Maybe you should invest in people, not papers." The cafe went silent. Ethan stared at her, surprised by her answer. "Invest in people?" He repeated with a short laugh. "That's not how business works." Lily smiled gently. "Maybe that's why most people forget what life really means," she said before walking away to serve another table. Ethan watched her go, still smiling but now curious. Her answer was too simple, yet it carried a strange truth. He didn't know why her words stayed in his mind, but they did. He found himself staring at the steam rising from his coffee, thinking about how long it had been since anyone had spoken to him like that, without fear or respect for his money. He stayed in the cafe longer than he planned, his phone untouched, his mind wandering back to her words. When Lily returned to clear his cup, he asked, "Do you always talk to customers like that?" She looked at him, slightly nervous but calm. "Only when they ask questions," she said. "And what if I keep asking?" Ethan said with a smirk. "Then I'll keep answering," she replied. There was no hesitation in her voice. Ethan leaned forward. "All right then. If money doesn't buy happiness, what does?" Lily paused, thinking. "Maybe honesty," she said softly. "Or kindness. They don't give profit, but they give peace." Ethan felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Interest, not in numbers or deals, but in a person. "You're quite sure of yourself," he said quietly. Lily smiled again. "No, sir. I'm just sure about what matters to me." The sound of her words echoed in his head as she walked away again. The billionaire who had spent his life chasing success suddenly felt small in front of a waitress who earned barely enough to survive. He didn't know her story, but he could see something rare in her: strength, calmness, and maybe a kind of wisdom that money couldn't buy. Before leaving, Ethan placed a $100 bill under his cup. When Lily noticed it, she hurried to his table. "Sir, this is too much," she said. Ethan turned around, amused. "Keep it," he said simply. But she shook her head. "I can't take it." "You already paid for the coffee? I don't earn tips like this." Ethan frowned. "You don't want extra money?" She smiled and said, "I want to earn it the right way." He looked at her, almost speechless. He had met millionaires who begged for his attention, and yet here was a waitress refusing extra cash. Something about that made him feel alive again. As he walked out of the cafe, the cool evening wind brushed against his face. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about stocks, profits, or meetings. He was thinking about a simple girl with tired eyes and a fearless heart. When he got into his car, his driver asked, "Home, sir?" Ethan looked back at the cafe sign glowing in the distance. "No," he said softly. "Drive around for a while." His mind was full of questions he couldn't explain. Who was she? Why did her words matter so much? And why, after all his years of success, did a simple waitress make him feel like he was the one being tested? That night, as the city lights blurred past his car window, Ethan realized something he had never felt before. Maybe his challenge wasn't for her at all. Maybe it was for himself.